Hi everyone, this is the Grand Duke Dmitri 1915 Diary Series, and we are in July at Stavka and doing a lot of traveling, Stavka being headquarters. And I need to remark that I very stupidly got my dates wrong yesterday. I put them, I was one day ahead. So yesterday we did the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. I'm going to get them wrong again. Today we're resuming with the 25th. So our recap for yesterday, we were in Vlodava, a small town in Poland. I thought maybe Ukraine, but no, it was in Poland. And obviously there was a big staff presence there, or a big military presence there, and Dmitri had a chance to spend time talking with an important general, General Lesh, and I'm sure he enjoyed that. He was always very interested in things like that. Okay, so we're resuming with the 25th of July / 7th August in Baranovichi for most of the day. And here we go. Morning, Vlodava. Airplane, bombs, departure, refugees. Kobrin. Lunch. Arrival at 7 o'clock. On the way, met the Supreme Commander. Presence of Yanushkevich. Dinner. Conversation with Nikolasha. Tea. Okay, so much decoding is needed for this one. So the first thing I would mention is that I spoke a little yesterday about the idea that this was sort of a rapid education for Dmitri and what was going on and where Russia stood. And he had been exposed, in the most horrifying possible way to the reality of combat in the First World War at the Battle of Kaushin in August 1914. He had been there in an extremely bloody battle, and so he knew what that was like. But even though Russia then had to retreat from East Prussia, there was still a sense that, victory was eventually going to come, and things were much gloomier in 1915 as the year went forward. And, Dmitri had very effectively, I think, pushed the whole war experience, his personal experience, to the back of his mind. When he was back in Petrograd and Moscow and Usovo and on leave, Crispin, it's my little dog, he it was a real strategy, a conscious strategy with him. He was prone to depression, and he would kind of, protect himself by deliberately pushing things out of his head. But now he's back, even though he's not in the thick of it like he was at Kaushin. He's seeing, the disturbing signs that, that are the proof that things are not going well, and that war is hell. So he mentioned seeing an airplane and there being bombing, presumably somewhere nearby, not in Vlodava itself. He talks about refugees on the way back to Baranovichi, to headquarters, and I think that would have been particularly striking. You're seeing, Polish and Ukrainian and Russian people, Jews, completely displaced and left with nothing. And so he encountered that. Now, Kobrin, he mentions that's the name of a place, a large town in Belarus. Headquarters was in Belarus. And he talks about that they met the Supreme Commander, whoever was with him, and on the train they stopped in Kobrin, and they met the Supreme Commander. That was Nikolasha. Later in this diary entry, he calls him Nikolasha, but this was more in a military capacity, I guess. So he calls him the Supreme Commander. He mentions that Yanushkevich is present. Yanushkevich is another important general in his 40s, Nikolai Nikolaevich Yanushkevich, and after arriving back in Baranovichi, he has dinner at Stavka and has afterwards a conversation with Nikolasha in tea. So maybe Nikolasha wanted to know what things were like in Vlodava and what his experience had been there and what General Lesh had to say. I mean, they were all in contact with each other, obviously, but it wasn't like you could have video conversations with someone. So yeah, that's probably what they talked about. That would be my guess. All right, going on to the 27th of July / 9th August. Here we go. Morning at Stavka. Congratulations to Nikolasha. Liturgy, new choir, lunch, bones, home. Tea at Stavka, riding. Dinner, ecclesiastical concert, then tea at Stavka, 2 Soldatenkovas, then to my quarters, drunken perdu with Kotzebue. Okay, again, lots to decode. So this was Nikolasha's name day. Any of you who are European know that St. Nicholas's, whether you're religious or not, you know that St. Nicholas's feast day is on the Santa Claus St. Nicholas. His feast day is on 6th December, one of the most important and beloved saints in Christendom. St. Nicholas of Myra, and almost all Nicholases were named after him, just like almost all Dmitris are named after St. Demetrios of Thessaloniki. But our Dmitri was named after a different St. Dmitri, and Nikolasha was named after a different St. Nicholas. And it's interesting that his parents chose that name. Because this St. Nicholas Kochanov of Novgorod, was a holy fool. So that's an interesting tradition in Russian history. So a holy fool was someone who lived out on the streets and deliberately, some were mentally ill, but in some cases it was a monk, usually someone who'd been really admired, and so to counteract that, they went out and they lived like a crazy person. They lived like a holy person or a homeless person, and this comes from the New Testament reference to being a fool for Christ's sake. I think St. Paul called himself that, and so St. Nicholas was one of these holy fools. And he was given the name Kochanov, which means cabbage, because people called him Cabbage-Head because of his odd behavior. So Nikolasha was named after Cabbage-Head, and I don't suppose anybody ever called him Cabbage-Head, but yeah, kind of charming. So then, because it's the feast day of St. Nicholas Kochanov, that means that it is Nikolasha's name day. So they had some special events. They had a liturgy, and there was a new choir at the church. They had a church choir. I translated it ecclesiastical concert, but yeah, I just didn't know what else to say because, anyway, there was this concert at or after dinner of a church choir, it sounds like. So all these special things. And Dmitri loved church music when it was good. He doesn't say in this instance, what his assessment of it was. But even, later on when he would be in London, he would go to Anglican churches sometimes just to listen to the music. He liked the organ music. Okay, then he goes to see Soldatenkova later that evening, and she is quite a touchstone for him. I don't know the nature of their relationship. It doesn't seem like there was any any hanky-panky. I mean, her husband was there, not that that would necessarily stop Dmitri, but she's kind of a touchstone for him, like the yacht club in Petrograd. It's like keeping him centered. And he did need women, older women, to keep him centered. So when he was in Petrograd, he went every day to the yacht club and was around the old men. And when he is at Stavka, he pretty much goes every day and sees Soldatenkova. All right, and then this interesting little thing that he kind of tacks on to the end. He goes back to his quarters, and the next thing he tells us that he's not only drinking Perdu with Kotzebue, but it's a drunken. It's not just one drink. They're getting drunk together. So drinking Perdu, in any language that uses both an informal and formal do, English or you, English does not, but in countries where you do use both of those, to be on a first name basis or to be on the basis of using the informal do, you mark it by having a drink with the person. You sort of intertwine your arms and drink, and then you're at Perdu. And I use the German expression, it's easier to say than the Russian, which is na, N-A-T, with this kind of letter of the alphabet that's unique to Russia, T, and then usually in English transliteration, it's marked by a Y. It's basically an E sound, but with a little bit of U. Hard to say, which is why I go to the German Perdu. And I think the two people that I've drank with were both German. So anyway, he drinks Perdu with Kotzebue. Kotzebue is quite a bit older than Dmitri and of higher rank. He is Colonel Alexander Pavlovich Kotzebue. He's one of Nikolash's many adjutants. And, did Dmitri drink Perdu with him because he was drunk, or did he regret it later? He doesn't say so. But this would give Kotzebue the right to just call Dmitri and skip everything else when they were together. I mean, obviously in formal situations he wouldn't do that. But it makes me think of a story that some of you remember from 1921 when Maria, when Dmitri encourages his sister on a drunken evening to drink Perdu with one of her friends, and afterwards her husband, Maria's husband, Putyatin, was just furious with Dmitri, just furious, because he didn't think that should have happened, that this woman wasn't good enough to be Perdu with Maria, and it made everything very, very tense and complicated, that whole incident. I wasn't even sure if women drank Perdu, but they do, I guess, at least Russian women. Okay, so moving on, we have the 28th July / 9th August, and here we go. Hangover after yesterday. Lunch at Stavka, riding on the Grey to the Soldatenkovs and the Golitsins. Tea at Stavka, then at Golitsina's. Dinner, staff cinema, tea at the Soldatenkovs. So it was kind of a day off for him, it sounds like. It's all socializing and going to the movies. Golitsyn, Vladimir Vava Golitsyn, as you know, was one of Nikolash's adjutants. The Soldatenkovs, both husband and wife, are a fixture there at headquarters. And the princess, Madame Golitsyn, was Yekaterina Georgievna Golitsina, and she was, sort of a coattail relative of the Romanovs, because her father was the Duke of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who was a Russified German and a member of the imperial family, on the female side treated as a member of the imperial family. And I knew this lady's son well, as I mentioned previously. And, very unfortunately, she was Dmitri's age. Her husband was a little older. She was Dmitri's age, and she was Yeah, she was someone he knew well. And so when she was killed in the Blitz in 1940, getting off a bus in London, he wrote about that, of course, in his diaries while he was at Sanatorium Chatzell. Okay, so what next? Well, what do we have next time? Well, it will be a significant jump for us because we'll be jumping from now, the 28th of July, to the end of September, I think the 21st or the 22nd. So actually, Dmitri will have caught up with us date or time with respect to the time of the year. So we'll be seeing him towards the end of September, just like we are ourselves. Well, as I do this video, I don't know when you're watching it, are toward the end of September. And what has happened in the meantime? Something big, something very big has happened in the meantime, which is that Nicholas II has taken over at Stavka. And as Supreme Commander, and has sort of banished Nikolai Nikolaevich to the Caucasus. And this was a political move. I mean, it was, not that Nicolasha was doing that great as a general, but by and large, it was a political move. Aside from the fact that it was just something Nicholas wanted to do. And why I say it was kind of the beginning of the end is because it meant the end pretty much of the progressive general staff element. We're not talking woke, of course, not progressive in that sense, but in terms of the day, the general staff officers, the graduates of the General Staff Academy, tended to be very progressive in outlook, and Nicolasha himself was. And yeah, Nicholas taking over and running these particular people out of Stavka is going to make for a much different atmosphere there. And Dmitri, who'd been at Stavka under Nicolasha, is now going to be at Stavka under Nicholas. And he tried personally. Well, we'll talk about that later. But Dmitri did try personally to dissuade Nicholas from doing that. Anyway, when we resume, he actually will not be at Stavka. He will be back in Petrograd, and he'll be spending time with a lot of family members. So I think we'll all enjoy that. And then the diary for 1915 goes on for less than a month. After we resume, it goes on from, toward the end of September until mid-November, and then we're done. And my inclination is probably to go on to 1917, since there's no surviving diary for 1916, but I shouldn't be talking about that now. Anyway, important things going on, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.